If you agree that not every hero wears a uniform, or that some of the bravest never even asked to be called one, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story will stay with you long after the credits fade. They said she was just a volunteer, just a girl in her late 20s who passed out blankets and books, who brought smiles to men too used to pain. But the truth was waiting in silence, buried 3 years deep under dust and disbelief, and it was about to resurface in a hospital hallway no one would ever forget. It began quietly, like most stories that matter do. Claire Matthews wasn't extraordinary by any measure that people notice. She didn't wear scrubs with rank patches or carry a stethoscope that swung like authority around her neck. She carried a clipboard, a bag of paperbacks, and a heart that hadn't yet learned how to stop caring. Every Tuesday and Friday, she walked the same pale corridors of St. Mary's Veterans Hospital, a place where time seemed to move slower, where the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and nostalgia. To the staff, she was a helper. To the patients, she was a momentary light between long nights. To herself, she was just trying to matter. The ward was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that feels thick enough to touch. Rain tapped against the windows, a soft percussion over the distant hum of machines. Claire moved from bed to bed, checking names she already knew by heart. Mr. Alvarez liked spy novels. Sergeant Brooks preferred history books about wars he'd lived through. Old Mr. Daniels, her favorite, pretended not to wait for her visits, even though he always left a folded note by his bed that said, "If you have time." She always had time. It wasn't glamorous work. Sometimes the men didn't speak at all. Sometimes they forgot where they were. But Claire never forgot who they were. Each handshake, each nod, each story half told through trembling lips felt like a bridge between her and something sacred. She had no uniform, no medals, but she had something that couldn't be pinned to a chest: presence. Still, there were days when her kindness was mistaken for naivety. "You're too young to understand what they've seen," one of the nurses told her once, eyes tired from double shifts. Claire had only smiled. She didn't say that she'd seen her share of blood, of screaming nights, of faces that faded too soon. She didn't tell them that there were places she still dreamed about, dusty, loud, and burning, places she was never supposed to be. Because who would believe that the quiet volunteer once crawled through rubble with shaking hands and no training? Only instinct and stubbornness guiding her forward. To everyone else, she was just Claire, the girl who always brought extra sugar for the coffee machine and remembered birthdays no one else did. But beneath the soft eyes and careful voice was a memory she'd locked away long ago, one she never let herself revisit. Not until that day. It started like any other shift. She clocked in, tied her hair back, and slipped on her volunteer badge. The ward smelled of rain and antiseptic. The nurse waved her toward room 214, new admission, recent evac, multiple injuries. "Combat trauma," the nurse said in a low voice. "He's stubborn. Doesn't want help." Claire only nodded. She'd met 100 like him. The wounded who thought accepting care was weakness. The ones who stared at ceilings as if they could still see the battlefield painted there. She carried a tray of water, gauze, and a small book, something neutral, something kind. When she pushed the door open, the air changed. The man in the bed looked half alive, his body wrapped in bandages, for lines like thin lifelines snaking into his arm. He was staring out the window, his eyes distant but alert, the kind that missed nothing. His nameplate read Sergeant David Cole. "Good afternoon," she said softly. "I'm Claire. I volunteer here on." He didn't look at her. "Volunteer," he muttered, voice coarse from days of morphine and silence. "That means you don't get paid to listen." Claire smiled gently, unfazed. "Maybe I just like good company." He turned then, and for the briefest moment, his expression shifted, not with recognition, but something else. Something searching. "You sound," he started, then shook his head. "Never mind." She placed the tray beside him, adjusted the pillow, careful not to meet his eyes too long. She learned that some men broke when met with too much kindness. "You'll be more comfortable now," she said. "The book's just in case you get tired of the ceiling." He gave a low hum that might have been a laugh. "Thanks." The word lingered heavier than she expected. As she stepped out into the hallway, she felt a strange unease settle in her chest, like something old and unfinished had just brushed against her life again. She told herself it was nothing, that it was just another patient. But deep down, a whisper of recognition tugged at the edge of memory, something buried under smoke and screams. Back at the volunteer desk, she checked her notes, forcing her hands to stay steady. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A nurse brushed past her, murmuring, "That new guy. Cool. He's got a stare like he's still out there. Poor thing doesn't even know where safe is anymore." Claire nodded, but she didn't look up. Her heart was already racing for reasons she couldn't explain. The evening stretched long. The rain grew louder. She helped one of the older veterans fix his hearing aid, then stayed an extra hour in the therapy room to set up tomorrow's equipment. When she finally passed by room 214 again, the door was half open, lights spilling into the dim corridor. She paused. Inside, David Cole was awake, staring at the small book she'd left on the tray. His hand trembled slightly as he turned a page. Something about the sight, the quiet focus, the way his brow furrowed, pulled her back to another night entirely. A night of fire, metal, and shouting. She could almost smell the smoke again. Hear the plea she'd never forgotten. "Don't leave me here. Please." She gripped the doorframe. For a heartbeat, the hospital dissolved around her. She was back there, kneeling in the mud, blood on her hands, her voice breaking as she dragged a wounded man toward the flicker of distant headlights. His face was a blur, his uniform shredded, his dog tag smeared with dirt. And before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Stay with me. I've got you." The sound of her own voice snapped her back to the present. She shook her head hard, forcing the image away. It wasn't real anymore. It couldn't be. But inside the room, David Cole's head turned sharply toward the door, as if he'd heard her. Claire took a step back, heart hammering, breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. She didn't know it yet, but that small, fragile thread, one sentence whispered in the dark, had just started to unwind a truth she thought would stay buried forever. And before the week was over, every soul in that hospital would learn that the quiet volunteer who smiled her way through pain and loss wasn't there to forget the war. She was there because she'd lived it. She just never told anyone. The next morning came wrapped in the kind of gray light that never fully wakes a city. The hospital corridors were half empty, the smell of coffee and disinfectant hanging in the air like routine itself. Claire moved through it quietly, her steps soft against the linoleum. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, flashes came back, flames, shouting, the weight of someone heavier than she could carry. But she pushed it away. The war was years behind her. Or so she told herself. Room 214 was different that morning. The curtains were drawn halfway, sunlight pooling faintly across the soldier's bed. David Cole sat upright now, and forced still in his arm, his expression taut but alert. He looked less broken than yesterday, until his gaze lifted and found her again. "You came back," he said, voice low but steady. "I always do," Claire replied with a gentle smile. Part of the job description. He studied her for a long moment, eyes narrowing slightly, as if searching for something that refused to hide. "What kind of volunteer?" he asked. "Looks like she's been through it too." She froze for just a second before masking it with practiced calm. "Maybe I just have one of those faces," she said lightly, setting down a tray. But he didn't smile. "No, it's more than that." His voice cracked on the last word, rough from effort. "That night in Kunar province, the convoy hit the ridge. Everything went to hell. You remember it." Claire's breath caught. The words hit like a punch she didn't see coming. She didn't answer, didn't move. The air between them thickened, charged. Around them, the ward seemed to fade into silence. He pushed himself higher on the bed, grimacing through the pain. "I woke up under the transport," he continued. "Fuel leaking everywhere. Thought it was over. Then there was a light, a flashlight, and a voice. A woman's voice." His hand trembled as he pointed at her. "You said, 'Stay with me.' I've got you." Every head in the room turned. Nurses stopped mid-step. A therapy aide froze by the door. Claire's face went pale. "Sergeant, I think you're confused," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't." But he cut her off, louder now, trembling, his emotions spilling past restraint. "Don't tell me I imagined it. I remember your hands pulling me free. You dragged me until the medevac found us. You were covered in blood. Everyone said you didn't make it out." The words hung there like thunder after lightning. Unbelievable, undeniable. Claire's knees felt weak. The small tray in her hands rattled. For a second, she thought she might drop it. Then, from the doorway, a deep voice spoke. "He's right. It was Dr. Reynolds, the senior physician, a man who rarely left his office. He stepped inside slowly, his face unreadable. "You were there, weren't you, Claire?" he said quietly. "In Kinner. Civilian medic convoy. Red Cross initiative, unauthorized but life-saving. I remember your name in the casualty logs. I thought." He paused, swallowing the rest. "We all thought you didn't survive." The room was silent except for the slow, rhythmic beep of a monitor. Claire didn't look at anyone. She set the tray down gently and clasped her hands in front of her. "I didn't do anything special," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shimmered with something raw. "He was just the one I could reach." David let out a broken laugh that was half a sob. "You dragged me 300 yards through fire, Claire. You were hit. You saved 6 of us. You call that nothing special?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Behind her, a nurse whispered, "Oh my God." Words spread through the ward like wind catching fire. The volunteer, the quiet one who brought books and cookies, was the woman who had pulled soldiers from burning wreckage halfway across the world. The one the reports had marked as missing, presumed dead. For the first time, Claire felt every pair of eyes on her, heavy with awe and disbelief. But she didn't bask in it. She looked at David instead, voice barely steady. "You made it out," she said softly. "That's all that matters." He smiled faintly through his tears. "No," he whispered. "What matters is you did too." And as the ward fell into hushed reverence, Claire Matthews, just the volunteer, finally stood visible in the light of the truth she'd spent years hiding. The days that followed changed everything. What began as whispers between nurses soon turned into quiet nods in the hallways, the kind people gave not out of gossip, but out of reverence. The hospital that once saw Claire Matthews as a kind stranger now moved around her with a quiet, newfound respect. She didn't ask for it. She didn't want it. But once truth escapes, it doesn't return to silence. David Cole was recovering faster than anyone expected. Every morning, he'd asked for physical therapy early, just so he could walk the same hallway where he'd first seen her again. He said it helped him remember that survival wasn't an accident. It was a gift. One afternoon, he stopped her by the window, his hand still trembling slightly from the strain of healing. "You never told anyone," he said. "Why?" Claire looked out at the rain-soaked parking lot, her reflection faint in the glass. "Because the ones we couldn't save don't get to tell their stories," she said quietly. "It felt wrong to tell mine." He didn't answer. He just nodded, the kind of understanding that comes from shared pain rather than words. Then, reaching into the pocket of his hospital robe, he pulled something out. A small, scorched piece of metal. A dog tag, edges blackened but name still clear. He placed it in her hand. "They found it near the wreckage," he said. "I kept it all this time. I thought whoever it belonged to was gone." Her breath hitched as she traced the letters engraved there. Her own. She hadn't seen it since that night. For years, she'd thought it lost, like so much else. Now it lay warm in her palm, returned by the very man she'd fought to save. Word of what had happened reached the hospital board within a week. A formal letter arrived, commendation for her service, acknowledgement of her role in the rescue, an invitation to be honored publicly. Claire read it once and folded it back into the envelope. She thanked them but declined. She didn't need a ceremony. She already had her reward. In the steady rhythm of David's footsteps down the hall, in the laughter returning to men who'd forgotten how to smile, in knowing that the past no longer had to hide. But the staff wouldn't let it end quietly. The head nurse organized something small. No speeches, no press, just the ward gathered together. They met in the common room on a bright Friday morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds like gold ribbons across the floor. The veterans stood as she entered, one by one. They saluted her, not as a volunteer, not as a civilian, but as one of them. Claire didn't cry. Not then. She smiled, though, the kind of smile that carries both pride and ache. "I didn't save anyone alone," she said softly. "We all did what we could." David stepped forward, still limping slightly but taller than before. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady now, "but you were the one who didn't stop." He paused, the room silent around him. "That night, you told me to stay with you. I did. And now it's your turn, Claire. Stay with us. Don't fade back into the quiet again." For the first time, she laughed through the tears she'd been holding back. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. Months later, her shifts looked the same. Same halls, same smiles, but the air felt different. Sometimes, she'd catch the younger nurses whispering her name in admiration, or see new volunteers standing a little straighter when she passed. She never corrected them, never told them not to make a fuss. Instead, she kept doing what she'd always done: show up, listen, care. On her last day before moving to a new Veterans Rehabilitation Center, she left a note taped to the break room wall. It read, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up on time and stays until the work is done." Later that week, a patient walking past room 214 noticed something new above the doorframe: a small plaque, polished and unassuming. It read, "In honor of Claire Matthews, the one who stayed." David Cole himself had ordered it. And so the story settled, not with headlines or applause, but with the quiet dignity that had defined it from the beginning. A woman who never sought recognition had become the reason others learned to see it. In every volunteer, every nurse, every quiet act that keeps the world from falling apart. In the end, Claire's secret didn't make her a hero. It just revealed what she'd always been: a reminder that courage isn't measured by rank or uniform, but by how far you're willing to go for someone else when no one's watching. And somewhere, in a hospital that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain, a soldier in recovery kept a single dog tag on his nightstand, not as a symbol of war, but as proof that sometimes, the ones who save you are the ones you were never meant to forget.